All right, in the meantime, we've got former Reagan budget director and author of the bestseller Trumped, David Stockman. David, always good to see you, my friend. Belated Happy New Year. All right, well, a lot of supply siders, for lack of a better word, David, are saying, wait a minute, we don't like this 1-2 rollout on tax cuts. Furthermore, we don't like the increasing talk we hear that they might not be as big tax cuts as we had hoped. What do you say?
Well, I have lots of hope and zero faith. Somehow the idea that Donald Trump is the second coming of Ronald Reagan is gotten in the mix. Wall Street has priced it in. It's just completely wrong. We're
going to get big tax cuts.
We're not going to, because we're in a diametrically different position.
Explain.
In 1980, the public debt was $930 billion, 30% of GDP. There was huge running room and open balance sheet for the accidental Keynesian stimulus that resulted from the tax cuts and the defense increase and the massive deficit. Ronald Reagan actually increased the public debt by $1.8 trillion, or 2 times more than had been generated by the first 39 presidents and the first 190 years of our history. Today, we've used all that up.
We'd consider us balanced if we had numbers like that today, right?
We're at 20 trillion of debt.
Well, you know, the argument for it is that the revenues we get from that would start cutting down that debt. You don't buy that.
I don't buy that. You will get some reflow, but what people don't understand...
They spend the reflow.
Yeah, they spend the reflow, but besides that, the base case forecast is so optimistic, such a rosy scenario, that they're going to need the reflow, the extra economic growth, to get back to where they started. In other words, the CBO baseline says there'll be no recession through 2026.
Does it really say that?
Yes, that's 200. Wait a minute.
That's ruling out history.
Yeah, this is ruling out. That's 206 months. The longest one we've ever had is 100 months or so in the 1990s under a much better circumstance. So therefore, if you program in sober economics and then you lay on some tax cuts that are in some way paid for, you will get a better economy over time. You will not get some huge surge.
So you, David Stockman, the man who was dragged to the woodshed by the Gipper because you dare question the wisdom of the tax cuts and whether they would add to the deficit and debt. You say this would be a mistake to be looking at big tax cuts that are beyond revenue neutral, because that's the Mitch McConnell position.
Right. I think they
So you're Mitch McConnell.
I do. Now, when he says deficit neutral, he means, well, we'll put in a little dynamic feedback. Fine. But we can't go, they have no room to go in there, and the reason for it is on March 15th, a stink bomb explodes, which is this holiday on the debt ceiling. There has been no debt ceiling since October 2015. It becomes frozen in on that date at whatever level we're at, probably 20 trillion plus. They'll have 200 billion of cash. It'll take them a couple months to use it up. They'll be in a debt ceiling crisis. Lose it up, use it up. They'll be in a debt ceiling crisis by June, and all of this legislation is going to be backed up. The infrastructure, the corporate tax reform. I'm for the corporate tax reform. Over time, lower rates, a broader base, even this border-adjusted view that turns it really into a VAT is a good idea. But it has to be paid for. It can't be added to the debt.
So you are in the establishment position on that.
I wouldn't call it the establishment.
Well, I want you to just react to this, because it sounds like you are. I don't want to put words in your mouth. This is from former Treasury Secretary John Snow telling me yesterday he agrees with the Mitch McConnell view, pay for these things. React to this. John Snow yesterday. You know this better than I. What's your sense of where this stands?
Well, Neil, we need tax reform. U.S. tax rates are too high. It penalizes our ability to be competitive in the world economy. I think with tax reform, Neil, most people will find that over time they get more in their paychecks. But tax cuts have to be paid for. Tax cuts don't pay for themselves.
All right, tax cuts have to be paid for. He's equating it to spending. Spending has to be paid for. Whatever you risk going deep into debt for in one area, you have to make up for in another. Do you agree with that? That there's no differentiation between tax cuts?
No, I don't. No, I believe spending cuts are far better, far more important than, we ought to do those first. But if we're going to have a large tax reform, It needs to have pay for itself with spending cuts or a broader base or a tariff on imports and a rebate on exports.
But in other words, if you're depending on that revenue, you can't change the revenue.
You can't, when you cut the revenue, let's say by 100 or 200 billion, maybe you'll get 30 or 40 billion of flow back, so make it a net 160. But beyond that, that 160 has to be paid for. Now, I think the Republican tax plan is a good one. But the idea that we're going to have...
I don't even know what it is.
Well, the outline of the House plan, okay? But the point I'm making is we don't have an open runway, a clean balance sheet to try some, huge experiment and an unfunded tax increase that will drive us deeper. Why? There's $800 billion in new borrowing this year alone. That's built in before one dime of Trump reform or infrastructure, all the rest of it. It's 10 or 12 trillion over the next decade before we do anything with the Trump program.